My relationship with addiction became more conscious when, at the age of around 21, through a series of inner tensions in which I felt out of control, I found myself compulsively eating sweets. And the physicality wasn't a big threat as much as the feeling of being out of control. The feeling of some force in there that was bigger than my rational mind. And my response at the time was to transfer the addiction to a work addiction, which was basically to focus on doing more and more work for longer and longer hours. And the theory was basically that I would have a healthier body and more money if I compulsively worked than if I compulsively ate sweets. And that informed my relationship with addiction going forward. I recognized in the back of my mind that 20 to 30% of my consciousness, of my personality, was compulsive. And I also recognized that I could move or focus that compulsivity in different directions. And so the question I asked myself is, since I wasn't chemically compulsive at this point, the only chemical compulsion I've had has been around eating food, eating sweets, and so it wasn't a cocaine or cigarettes or anything that would be traditionally considered highly addictive. And so the question I asked myself was, what would be the most intelligent arena to focus my addiction or my compulsion? Because I didn't have much to go on. Certainly the culture, whether in therapy or family or work or general conversation, did not really inform me on how to relate to this odd phenomena. And so I just thought, if I'm going to do something compulsively, why not do something that's going to contribute? So different things that I've compulsively done. One is goal achievement. So yearly, quarterly, monthly, weekly, daily goals. And another is being on time for appointments. And when I say, these things are addictive, what I mean is there's a certain field, a certain feeling, an energy in which it's not about being present and enjoying the moment. There's a tightness. There's oh my gosh, I've got to do this right now. I can't rest until it's done type of energy. And whether that energy is around food or whether that energy is around processing events in the past or whether that energy is around fears, whatever it is, that's the feeling. And so the question is, well, where do I want to have those feelings? And things like not wanting to be late for an appointment, usually a business appointment, but not wanting to be late, that wasn't really a choice. That's just something I observe, that it's somehow a big deal for me to be late. And the work is somewhat of a choice. How many hours do I want to work if I want to exhaust my body? Then later on, I decided to make therapy an addiction. Meaning that if I was going to intensely and somewhat compulsively do things, why not do a lot of therapy? Because the idea, if therapy is worth anything in terms of healing, etc., then if you addictively do something that heals addiction, maybe it would cancel itself out. And so goal achievement, work, being on time, as part of goal achievement, making money, these were all things that seemed like decent things to do of an addictive nature. When work started dialing down, when I created a lifestyle that was successful enough that I was working 3-4 hours a day, 6 months of the year, then that stopped being the addiction. And so I looked at other addictions. And, one of the, so I've had a pornography addiction, meaning I've had that same compulsive feeling around pornography. And my thought at the time was that, as a cerebral person that's, relatively disconnected in this culture, that masturbation might connect me with my own body. And in truth, I've had a number of gestalts and creative enterprises that, start right after the chemistry. So there's, with masturbation, there's a regulation of breathing, there's a pumping of blood, there's focus, and then there's this release. And on the other side of orgasm, there is a chemical shift in the body. And so there's a certain, openness. And that seemed healthier than just like watching Netflix addiction or whatever, which I've also, in more recent years, had somewhat of a media addiction. And so, again, the softening of the blow there being to choose every bit of my media. So delete all the, subscribe to things that don't have any ads, choose my media carefully. And if I watch media compulsively, at least see that it's taking me someplace that I want to go. So this was kind of running along in the background. And then I was, psychologically, therapeutically, sexually abused, by a healer, therapist, etc., under the influence of psychedelics, which just amplified all of that. And, this really kind of added to the pain, the terror, the loneliness, etc., and with that, an escalation of addiction. And in this case, I chose food because it also brought in a number of symptoms of PTSD, and so I wasn't able to constructively focus the addiction. I couldn't focus on therapy because it was a therapist who had abused me. I couldn't focus on reading because I couldn't concentrate. So I focused on media digestion that was useful. I focused on eating just to numb the pain. I focused on doing healing work, in an intense way, massage, energy work, swimming. Swimming seemed like a healthy thing. I've also felt that compulsive energy around relating, and this ties in with an insecure attachment pattern or an insecure attachment template with both parents. And in that sense, just noticing how panicky I felt when I wasn't in a very secure relationship that I could relax in. Interestingly, while masturbation has that compulsive energy, if I'm connecting heart, mind, and body with another human being, I don't feel any of that energy. It's all about presence. And so that's, I see as, the healthiest movement of this energy is into deep, secure attachment with another human being. And so that's generally been a push. My being able to be affectionate in a secure way with my dog has been a mediating aspect. And also I would say that in terms of the compulsive rumination, I've generally tried to take that outward. So for example, this whole project of a growing human being is about externalizing things that otherwise might ruminate. And so by constructively writing books, teaching classes, having conversations, pursuing goals, traveling, having a healthy mental, emotional, physical sexuality with another human being, having deep conversations, all of this seems healthy and medicinal. Now, Gabor Mate has written some, I think, in The Land of Hungry Ghosts. He's certainly one of the more foremost speakers in addiction, and Bessel van der Kolk, with his book The Body Keeps the Score, again integrating the language of trauma and the language of compulsively managing consciousness. And I think that's my paradigm for addiction at this time, is that deep underlying traumas, the trauma of not having a secure, healthy attachment template with either parent, the trauma of various dissociations without repair, the trauma of shock, grief, and loss without repair, have all created pockets of overwhelming terror, loneliness, grief, etc., which, when in the natural circular movement of attention, when my attention and consciousness moves close to those areas, and an undeveloped and untrained ego doesn't know how to process that overwhelming information, it seems as if I look for a narrow band, repetitive distraction of some kind that will allow me to navigate through that overwhelm without feeling overwhelmed. You can think of the way horses are trained to drive on the street. If you go to London or Manila and see, these different tourist horse rides running down the road, the horses have blinders on them that only allow them to see directly in front of them. And what this does is it stops them from being overwhelmed and traumatized by a biology that doesn't know how to respond to cars rushing by in this way and that way, or coming up behind. And so the blinders allow the horse to stay safe by keeping focused and keeping steady. If they become erratic, they will die. And so, to a certain extent, I think that any compulsive, repetitive habit is a coping mechanism of an undeveloped ego who can't deal with certain painful probability fields around them. And so the blinder is the obsession or the fixation on a thought, on a past memory, on a guilt, on a shame, on a whatever it is, and just repeats that over and over again, on a sugar, on a lie, whatever the pattern is, on an adrenaline addiction. It seems like the focus is to navigate traumatic terrain with blinders on, until in that circular pattern of consciousness, the consciousness moves on to the next terrain. And so it's very much, if you can think of trauma like a forest fire. And if you have unresolved trauma, that there's part of the psyche that's on fire. And, in the circular pattern of the human ego lens, the ego lens is kind of navigating the self and the world in this circular pattern, which means that from time to time it's going to turn towards the forest fire, towards that terrain in the psyche that is overwhelmed with energy it doesn't know how to digest and process on its own, given the level of traumatic illiteracy in our culture. So it's going around and it's hitting that terrain, and then it's saying, I can't deal with that, and then it's saying, distract me, because I'm moving in that direction. So okay, I'll compulsively masturbate, or I'll compulsively watch Netflix, or I'll compulsively write and achieve goals, and that thing will just pass by. And and every time I get near that, I will feel the urge to compulsively do something. For example, with someone who has experienced traumatic abandonment, every time they get close to a vulnerability in a relationship, they may compulsively push the other person away so as not to vulnerably enter that pattern of abandonment again. And so they pick a fight, or they do something like this so as to stop the ego from being confronted with the overwhelming energy head on. And this is, of course, an incredibly destructive, short-sighted coping strategy, which is the only thing left to individuals in a traumatically illiterate culture that doesn't teach us how to deal with this. And so, having discovered the language of trauma, and doing a lot more work in that domain, desensitization, integration, articulation, healing and growing, loving and responding, forming secure attachments, etc., to be able to navigate more and more of my own psyche without going into a panic that leads to a compulsive reaction. Now, I'll just close by saying one thing that Gabor Mate found when, for example, rats would have the option of having cocaine in a highly stressful environment in which they couldn't escape. There's nothing more stressful to a rat than being surrounded by Klieg lights and sociopathic humans in white coats going around poking them to see how fast they will die. In that environment, a rat will press the cocaine pedal and addict themselves to death. And this has been used to justify the idea that substances are profoundly addictive to anyone and they are the enemy. And that in turn gives rise to erroneous paradigms such as a war on drugs, as opposed to being more honest and calling it a war on families, countries, and human beings, a war on the citizenry. But focusing on the war on the drug as opposed to understanding the ecological predisposition, or that is being created by an unhealthy culture. And if you take those same rats and you give them a beautiful family, take the sociopathic scientists out of the equation, give them safety, give them a nice burrow in the ground, give them great food alternatives, and have them have a healthy tribe and community with other rats that are not threatened with trauma. And you put a cocaine bottle at the end, at the edge of the tunnel, so they could take some cocaine or not. They will not kill themselves. Whether or not they take a little cocaine, they will not kill themselves with cocaine the way they will in a highly traumatized environment. And so this suggests a new paradigm, that sociopathic, highly traumatic environments in a traumatically illiterate culture without repair is the enemy, and that in that hostile environment, human beings will do a variety of things that are self-destructive, trying to escape that pain, but that given healthy, strong families and healthy, strong communities, and I'm not talking about sugarcoating and shadow denying and putting on mask face, etc., to deal with, to obscure all the shadow work within our culture, within our psyche. I'm talking about healthy cultures in which the full range of emotions can be expressed, in which trauma can be resolved, in which the shadow is given back to the cult and the abuser that's dumping that on the child. In those types of environments where all voices are heard, where all feelings can be safely felt and understood, where there is traumatic repair by deep holding and a restoration of trust and safety that begins by acknowledging the abuse of the government of its people, the abuse of the family of its children, the abuse of the education system of its children, the abuse of the employee in its capitalist framework. When that abuse is acknowledged and feelings are safe and relationships are secure, people are not all that interested in binge Netflixing and addictively destroying themselves, because there's a safe promise of a beautiful future. And it's towards that end that I believe the most constructive attention can be turned, to educating ourselves on the pros and cons of various substances, to making them legal, to communicating the value of each human being, to providing safe environments for the more healthy spectrum of whether it's psychedelics or marijuana or whatever the substance is, in a safe and ritualized format of inner awareness and inner growth. And finally, to attending to the chronic, denied, wounded parts of our culture's psyche in the intergenerational abuse cycles, be they sexual, be those financial, be that physical or verbal, the amount of shame that's going from one generation to the next in this culture of silent secrecy and shame. That in this environment, we do not have to see substances as an enemy, because we can restore human beings to a place of competency to cope with the natural griefs, with the natural losses, with the natural uncertainty. That is part of life.